I'm Mary, and I've been a doctor for almost as long as I've been Adam's wife. We've had our share of good times and tough moments, but those 32 years together passed by so quickly. Our home, big and warm, was always full of life, especially when our sons, Larry and Brian, were young. Larry and Brian were very different from each other, like night and day, but each brought their own kind of happiness into our lives. Adam and I, both being doctors, worked really hard to create a comfortable life for our family. Over the years, we managed to buy a couple of apartments, renting them out for some extra money. Life seemed to be going well until one day, Adam came home looking pale and more serious than I had seen him in years. "Mary, we need to talk," he said with a heavy tone as he put down his medical bag by the door. "I had some tests done last week. The results, they came back. It's cancer, Mary." The months that followed were a whirlwind of hospital visits, treatments, and endless hours spent in waiting rooms. Adam fought bravely, but the cancer was relentless. Watching the strongest man I knew weaken and fade away was heartbreaking. No amount of medical knowledge could prepare me for that kind of pain. One evening, as we sat quietly in the living room, Adam took my hand and said, "Mary, if things don't go the way we hope, you need to make sure everything is taken care of with the boys. The will is all set, and you'll be fine financially." Not long after that conversation, he was gone. The funeral was a solemn event, with family, friends, and colleagues coming from all over to pay their respects. But it was the quiet in the house after everyone left that hit me the hardest. The empty spaces where Adam used to be, his belongings still in their usual places, it was painful to see and remember. A few days after the funeral, I was in the kitchen, trying to figure out what to do with all the leftover food, when Larry stormed in, his face full of worry and anger. Brian followed behind him, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else but here. "Mom, we need to talk about Dad's will," Larry said, getting straight to the point, as he always did. I sighed and put down the cling film I was holding. "Yes, I know. Your father left everything to me. He wanted to make sure." I was trying to manage things when Larry slammed his hand on the counter and said, "But what about me and Brian? We're his sons. It's not fair that we get nothing." Brian stepped in, trying to calm things down. "Larry, let's not rush into this. Mom's still grieving, and we can sort this out without fighting." Larry shot him a look and said, "It's easy for you to say. You're not thinking about the future like I am." I leaned against the counter, feeling the weight of their stares. "Your father and I built this life together, and he trusted me to take care of things. But I understand what you're saying, Larry. It's not my intention to leave you out." "So what then?" Larry asked, crossing his arms and raising his voice. "Do we just wait until you decide it's the right time to give us our share?" "Larry, watch your tone," I snapped, my patience wearing thin. "I am still your mother." Brian stepped between us, holding up his hands like a referee. "Both of you, please. This isn't helping." "Mom, maybe there's a middle ground here." I nodded and rubbed my temples, thinking it over. "Okay, here's what we can do. The apartments your father and I invested in the ones downtown," I started, but Larry interrupted. "Yes, those." I gave him a look that told him to be quiet for a moment. "I was thinking you each take one. They're yours to live in or rent out. And from the savings, let's say $320,000 each to help you get started with whatever you need." Larry bit his lip, clearly doing the math in his head. "And the rest of the stuff? The house, the money?" he asked. "That stays with me for now," I replied. "When I'm gone, it will come to you, as your father wanted." Larry looked like he wanted to argue more, but Brian nudged him and said, "Let's think about this. It's a fair start. Mom's not leaving us with nothing." Larry finally nodded, though he still seemed unhappy. "Fine, but I want this in writing, Mom. No more surprises." Of course, I agreed. "We'll get everything documented properly." As they left the kitchen, I could hear Brian whispering to Larry, "Give her a break, will you? She's doing her best." Larry muttered something under his breath that I couldn't catch, and honestly, I didn't really want to. As I washed up the dishes, I wondered if Adam could see us and what he would think. I hoped I was making the right choice, but only time would tell. And time, that tricky thing, isn't always on your side. It was a sunny afternoon, one of those rare days that makes everything feel okay, when Larry brought Julie over to meet me for the first time. They hadn't been dating long, but Larry was already head over heels for her. You could tell by the way he was fussing over her, which wasn't like him at all. They walked in, and right away, Julie had this confident air about her, like she owned the place. She was dressed up and strolled into my living room, with barely a hello, her eyes scanning everything around. "Nice place you've got here," she said, flipping her hair back as she sat down without waiting to be invited. Larry was sitting beside her, grinning like a fool. I forced a smile, trying to be a good host. "Thank you, Julie. Can I get you anything? Coffee, tea?" "Coffee sounds lovely," she replied, then turned to Larry. "Babe, make sure it's black, no sugar." Larry nodded and headed to the kitchen, leaving me alone with her in my own living room, feeling like I was the guest. The silence was awkward until she finally spoke. "So Larry tells me you're pretty well off," she said, looking around at the decor. "I'm used to a certain standard, you know. My parents made sure of that." "That's good to hear," I said, not really sure what else to say. Larry came back with the coffee and handed Julie her cup. She took a sip and made a face. It's all right. Anyway, we've been talking about our future together, planning ahead, you know." "That's wise," I said, glancing at Larry, hoping he'd give me some clue about where this conversation was going. Julie set her cup down and said, "Yeah, and speaking of planning, we've been thinking about the wedding. You know, I want something special. Larry has probably told you I saw this place that's perfect for a rehearsal dinner, but it's a bit pricey. It's about $50,000. I almost choked on my coffee. $50,000 just for the rehearsal dinner. Larry jumped in. "Mom, it's important to Lauren. We want to start things off right." I put my cup down, feeling a storm brewing inside. "Look, that's a lot of money for a dinner, Julie. We need to be reasonable." Julie's face hardened. "Reasonable? Larry says you have the means. I don't see why we should compromise on something that important." Larry was nodding along with her, but I could see the unease in his eyes. He knew he was asking too much. "I'm all for celebrating," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, "but $50,000 is more than I can justify." Julie stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I'm not used to compromising on my standards, Mary." I made it clear to Larry that I expected a certain standard of living. Larry tried to calm things down. "Mom, maybe we can find a middle ground." "There's no middle ground on $50,000 for a dinner, Larry. That's final," I snapped, my patience running out. Julie picked up her purse and glared at me. "Fine, if that's how it's going to be, then maybe we need to rethink some things." They left soon after, and I sat there, stunned by what had just happened. The nerve of that girl, coming into my home, drinking my coffee, and telling me how to spend my money, it felt like a slap in the face, a wake-up call I wasn't prepared for. A few days later, I was out at the grocery store when Larry and Julie decided to drop by again. By the time I got home, Brian was awkwardly trying to entertain them in the living room. The tension in the air was so thick that it made me want to turn around and leave, but it was my house, so I gathered my courage and walked in. Julie, all dressed up as usual, handed me a list as soon as I put down my grocery bags. "Mary, we've thought a lot about the wedding gifts, and here's what we've decided on. I hope this will be easier for you to handle." I quickly looked over the list she handed me. It was surprisingly reasonable kitchen appliances, some nice china, even a couple of pieces of furniture. "This seems quite reasonable," I said, feeling a moment of relief. "I think these are wonderful choices, really." Larry looked at Julie with hope in his eyes, but just as I was about to discuss where we could buy these items, Julie's expression changed suddenly. She gasped, "Oh no, this isn't right. Give that back." She snatched the list from my hands and dug through her purse, pulling out another sheet of paper. Here's the actual list. This new list was nothing like the first. It included an apartment, a luxury car, an exclusive vacation, and even diamond jewelry. My jaw dropped. Is this some kind of joke? Julie didn't flinch. No joke, Mary. These are the gifts we expect only the best for our wedding. I stared at her, then at Larry, waiting for him to say something, anything, to show he didn't agree with this craziness. But he just stood there, looking between us, clearly conflicted but saying nothing. I couldn't hold back anymore. Larry, why are you letting her do this? You know this is unreasonable. Julie cut in, her voice rising. This doesn't concern you, Mary. You just need to pay up and keep quiet. When Brian stood up, his face was serious. That's enough, Julie. You're not going to talk to our mom like that. This is her house, and you're way out of line. You need to leave now. The room was filled with tension as Larry and Julie gathered their things. Julie was muttering under her breath, clearly angry. This is ridiculous. We'll remember this. They left, and the door slammed shut behind them. I sat down, feeling the weight of the whole situation pressing on me. Brian sat beside me and put an arm around my shoulders. We'll figure this out, Mom, but you can't let them push you into giving more than you can or should. It's not right. He was right, of course, but as I sat there with my son, I couldn't help but worry about Larry. How had things gotten so out of hand? How could he not see what this was doing to our family? The silence that followed was filled with unspoken worries and fears for the future. I knew then that this was far from over. It was only going to get harder from here. In the weeks that followed, I received constant phone calls from Larry. Each one was more demanding than the last, his tone desperate and sometimes almost frantic. Mom, you don't understand. I can't look poor next to Lauren's family, he'd argue, his voice cracking with stress. You have the money. Why can't you just help me out here? I sat at the kitchen table, thumb pressed against my ear, feeling a knot in my stomach. Larry, it's not about the money. It's about living within your means. Lauren's expectations are too high, and you can't keep up with them without going into serious debt. He'd scoff, his frustration boiling over. What do you know about it? I'm not going to live like a pauper. I need more from the inheritance now. The amount you've offered isn't enough. Larry, I've offered to cover half the wedding costs, up to $135,000, and give a $8,000 gift. That's more than generous. Everything has to be agreed upon with me, though no surprises. There was a pause, then a sharp laugh from him. That's nothing. You're just being stingy. You have $1 million sitting there. Why are you holding out on me? Because it's not just about the money, I replied, my patience wearing thin. It's about not feeding into this unrealistic fantasy that's going to ruin you. He yelled, loud enough that I had to pull the phone away from my ear. I don't need this. I'll handle it my way. Forget you. And with that, the call ended. Months passed in silence. I tried to keep myself busy with daily routines, trying not to worry about Larry, but the peace was short-lived. One afternoon, the phone rang, and it was my sister-in-law, Hannah. Mary, I thought you should know. Hannah's voice was hesitant, careful. Larry is flying all the wedding guests to Bermuda. He sold his apartment to pay for it and expects you to get there on your own. He mentioned you weren't interested in helping. I hung up, a mix of anger and sorrow swirling inside me. How could he be so reckless? Before I could process it all, Brian came into the room, his expression serious. Mom, there's something you need to hear. I recorded their conversation when they were sitting here in the living room. He handed me an audio recorder. I pressed play, and the voices of Larry and Julie filled the kitchen. Your mom is just a nasty old woman with a fat wallet. We need to squeeze as much as we can out of her and then cut her off, Julie's voice said coldly. Larry's voice responded, just as chilling. Whatever it takes, Lauren. I'm not going to let her control us. If it comes down to it, I'll kick her out in her underwear. I turned off the recorder, my hands trembling. Hearing my own son speak like that about me, his mother, was too much. The room spun as I tried to understand the depth of his betrayal. Deciding to fly to Bermuda wasn't easy, but Brian was by my side, both of us tense but determined to face whatever awaited us. When we landed and approached the venue, I was taken aback by the sheer extravagance of it all. Flowers everywhere, lights strung like stars across the evening sky, and music floating in the air. As we walked into the gathering, I spotted Larry and Julie mingling with the guests. They looked like the perfect couple, all smiles and laughter. My heart ached to see my son so lost in this artificial paradise. Before I could take another step towards them, Julie spotted us. Her smile vanished, replaced by a scowl as she marched over, her high heels clicking angrily against the stone pathway. "You shouldn't be here," she hissed, stopping just inches from me, her voice loud enough to draw attention. "This is my day, and you're not welcome." I was stunned, but before I could respond, her parents, who had overheard everything, came over. Her father, a tall and stern-looking man, spoke first. "Julie, that is no way to speak to your guest, especially not to Larry's mother." His tone was firm, and it made her cheeks flush with embarrassment. Her mother, looking just as upset, turned to me with an apologetic smile. "Mary, please come with us. Let's find you a place to sit." They guided us away to a table at the edge of the setup. It was clear that this spot was an afterthought, with no proper setting. The ceremony started soon after, with speeches that felt empty given the tension. Then, unexpectedly, I was handed the microphone. I stood up, my legs shaky but my resolve firm. "I came here today to wish my son and his new wife a happy future," I began, my voice steady despite how I felt inside. "But I also believe in honesty and integrity, qualities that have been sadly missing in the events leading up to this day." Julie's face went from pink to red, her eyes glaring at me with anger. I was asked for money, time, and again in amounts that no reasonable person would find justifiable. When I couldn't meet these demands, I was threatened with being cut off from my family and future grandchildren. My voice cracked a little, but I continued. Brian, seeing my distress, stepped closer and put a supportive hand on my shoulder. I nodded at him, then played the audio recording he had made. Julie's voice filled the air, cold and calculating, discussing how they would get more money from me. Larry's voice agreed, saying he was willing to leave me with nothing for the sake of his bride. The crowd murmured, shocked and disapproving. I turned off the recorder, and the silence was heavy. I gave my son an apartment and $35,000, and yet it was never enough. Today, I'm making it clear that I will not be treated as an ATM or threatened. I am disowning Larry and Julie. I wish them well, but from this day forward, I am choosing to remove myself from their lives. The reaction was immediate. Julie screamed, her voice shrill and wild. "You've ruined my wedding. I curse you." After everything that had happened, coming back home was bittersweet. In the quiet, I made a decision that even surprised me. I quit my job. I had spent years healing others as a doctor, but now it was time to heal myself and rebuild the life that recent events had shaken. Brian, bless his heart, had just graduated from art college and was full of ideas and ambition. With the $37,000 I gave him, Brian opened his own tattoo parlor. It wasn't just any shop, it quickly became a place where art and skin came together in beautiful ways. Brian put his heart and soul into his work, and it paid off. He started entering tattoo contests, and soon his name was on everyone's lips in the local community. Before we knew it, he was opening more locations, creating a network of salons that became a hotspot for tattoo enthusiasts. I'd watch him sketch late into the night, his dedication a sharp contrast to the chaos his brother had chosen. "You're doing amazing, Ollie," I'd say, pride swelling in my chest. During these peaceful months, Larry reappeared one afternoon. He showed up at the door, his eyes tired, His shoulders slumped a far cry from the ambitious, sharp man he used to be. "Mom, I need to talk," he said, not waiting for an invitation to sit down. His voice was weary, so different from the demanding tone I had grown used to. I sighed and motioned for him to continue. "What is it, Larry?" "It's Lauren. She's driving me crazy, wanting more and more. Nothing's ever enough. I got a second job, but it's still not enough for her." His words were filled with desperation, but they couldn't erase the past so easily. "Larry, I warned you. I told you that living like that with someone like her was unsustainable." He rubbed his face, frustration clear. I know you did, but I thought," his voice trailed off, hopelessness replacing any explanation. "Thought what?" "That money would just appear because you wanted it to." My tone was harsh, years of pent-up frustration making it hard to soften my words. "Look at your brother. He started with the same amount and made something of himself without stepping on others." Larry bristled. "Yeah, well, not everyone's like Brian, are they? I have rights to the inheritance too, remember? And when you're gone, it'll come to me." That was the last straw. "Get out, Larry," I said, my voice cold and firm. "And don't come back. Not this time. You chose your path." His jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought he might argue, but then he turned and walked out, the door slamming shut behind him. As I stood in the silence that followed, Brian came downstairs, having heard the last part of our exchange. "Are you okay, Mom?" he asked. I nodded, wrapping my arms around him. "I am now, thanks to you. Let's just focus on the good we can do and the life we can build." He hugged me back, his presence a comforting reminder that not everything was lost in that moment. I knew that despite the heartaches, the journey was still worth it. We had each other, and that was enough to keep moving forward. After the storm with Larry had passed, our home settled into a calm I hadn't felt in years. It was during this peaceful time that Brian brought someone special home. Her name was Joyce, and she was everything Jolie wasn't: kind, humble, and genuinely caring. As the weeks turned into months, their relationship grew stronger, and soon they announced their engagement. The wedding was nothing like Larry's extravagant affair. It was a simple, heartfelt ceremony in our backyard. Flowers from the garden, homemade decorations, and a small group of close friends and family made the day perfect. During the reception, I pulled Brian aside and said, "You've chosen a wonderful woman," my voice thick with emotion. He squeezed my hand and replied, "I learned from the best," giving me a knowing look. Life moved quickly after that. They sold the apartment I had given Brian, added some of their savings, and bought a small, cozy house just a few miles away. One sunny afternoon, while we were having tea in their new living room, Joyce shared some exciting news. "Mary, we're expecting twins," she announced, her eyes shining with joy. I nearly dropped my cup, overwhelmed with happiness. "Twins? Oh my goodness, that's wonderful." Brian beamed, his pride evident. "We wanted you to be the first to know. We're really happy, Mom." "Twins," I repeated, letting the words sink in. Grandchildren, it was a new chapter, one I was eager to begin. As for Larry, news from him was rare. The last I heard, he had divorced Julie. She had taken nearly everything in the split, leaving him to start over in another city. Despite the pain he had caused, it hurt to know he was out there somewhere, struggling because of his choices. One evening, as I sat looking through old photo albums, Brian came and sat beside me. He noticed a picture of Larry and me from years ago. "Do you ever hear from him?" he asked softly. I shook my head. "No, after everything, he's chosen his path, and I have to respect that, even if it breaks my heart." Brian put an arm around me. "He's still my brother, Mom. Maybe one day he'll come around." Maybe, I agreed, though I wasn't really sure if he ever would. I believed it too, but for now, we have plenty to keep us busy, especially with those twins on the way. Brian chuckled. "Yeah, you're about to be the busiest grandma in town." We both laughed, and the sound filled the room with warmth. Despite the past, despite the mistakes and heart attacks, This moment with Brian felt like everything was exactly as it should be. Life was moving forward, and so were we, with new hopes and dreams just around the corner.